You know ID in the town all day. ID in the SEA. You know ID in the town all day. ID in the SEA.
Hello and welcome to episode 399 of the fabulous Peltoncast, sponsored by our friends at Pagliacci Pizza. I'm your co-host, Kevin Pelton.
And I'm Tristan Carcino.
And we're coming to you in different locations tonight because of the freezing rain.
Hello.
I'm in Seattle, Washington, home of the four-time WNBA champion Storm.
And I'm coming to you from Renton, Washington, home of the Super Bowl 48 champion Seattle Seahawks.
And very soon, home of the two-time MLS Cup winning Seattle Sounders FC. But we'll get to that a little bit later in the
Renton,
pod.
Washington?
We've talked about it. But
Wow.
It's officially happening very soon.
Oh, man. Renton, Washington, not too bold for the Seahawks and the Sounders. Cafe Vita, Pagliacci. Don't mean to call you out, but
Dicks.
Little Woodies, Dicks. Not too bold for them, but we are coming to you for the 99 and the 2000.
Some of the highlights of our Let's Remember Some Years series back in the day. But it's very weird to be doing a podcast and not start it with a special episode. Because lately there have been more special episodes than regular episodes. We're like
episode of the Peltoncast.
We have conducted 4 emergency podcasts in the last 8 days. 3 of them between this last most recent weekly pod and this pod. When we talked about I don't know, I guess we didn't even really talk about that. We talked about UW football's future, and we talked about Pete Carroll, and little did we know that all of those things were going to be wildly different by the time
So we
didn't
know a week ago when we recorded the last weekly podcast about
We didn't know that Nick Saban was
or
retiring.
Pete Carroll.
Nope.
Oh my God.
Like it was
We were so naive a week ago.
a lot has changed. So much has changed. The
Man,
Huskies
we
had
are
a head
world weary.
The Huskies had a head coach, Kevin DeBoer. Then they didn't have a head coach. And then they had a new head coach, Jed Fish, all within the span of the week since we last
Wow.
recorded. The Seahawks still do not have a head coach.
It's been a
Huskies don't have
long year
quarterback.
this last week.
Exactly. So obviously still a lot to get to. If you haven't listened to the most current emergency pods, the original Kalen DeBoer one, I think is still worth a listen for the discussion, kind of the big picture discussion.
Which of
about
the
importance.
podcasts are not worth a listen?
Well, I think last week's
Just-
weekly pod, the part about Pete Carroll continuing to coach the Seahawks, it's worth a listen for amusement. It's not as educational anymore.
See, I don't know if I agree with that, because there was the whole rant ending with Pete Carroll retire, bitch. And
Fair. Just turn it off at the Pete Carroll retire, bitch, and move
yeah,
ahead.
at that point, be like, wow, how fortuitous this was. I put on my Nostra Tristan hat, which is why I said Pete Carroll retire, bitch. And then I didn't say any of the things about Pete Carroll is definitely coming back. The team is in Pete Carroll's image. He runs the franchise. Ignore all that stuff.
Do listen to the part where I said Pete Carroll said he plans on coming back.
Yeah.
That's not the same.
Also, wait, did you see the Pelton quotes tweet about Jed Fish
I
saying
did-
that
I
from a
did see the
year
Pelton
ago? Literally, I do not remember the name Jed Fish coming out of my mouth before like a month ago.
So this was episode 341. This would be 58 weeks ago. So probably end of November 2022. Is quoted on the Discord. Well, it's quoted on
Pelton quotes.
X, formerly Twitter, at Pelton Quotes, but brought back up by Pelton Quotes on the Discord. Tristan, I want there to be an alternative world where I'm a college football coach. Kevin giggles. Tristan, like seeing the Jed Fish extension, and I was like, Arizona reached the level of competent. And then they're like, we've got to extend Jed Fish. And then it turned out their extension for Jed Fish wasn't enough to keep it.
I know. I mean, isn't that hilarious? But no, I agree with Tristan a year ago. The only thing, well, sort of, but like, I don't think almost anybody, they were still picked 8th in the Pac-12 to start the season. It's not like Arizona was. And so you see that and you're like, wow, look at this idiot complaining about Jed Fish as if that had just happened. The point remains still. The point is, I want an alternate world where I'm a college football coach, and I feel that even stronger than I did a year ago, because the money going around for college football coaches is incredible.
Well, I think that's
including Jed Fish.
We'll talk more about the Huskies obviously later in the podcast. I do think it's an interesting big picture point. Like you look even the difference between Kalen DeBoer's contract when he was hired 14 months ago
Yeah.
and Jed Fish's contract. And like Jed Fish is a better candidate than Kalen DeBoer. He's already in a major conference. He had a better contract than Kalen DeBoer did as a first-time head coach at Fresno State. But it's still like night and day on their contracts. And then if you go back to Jimmy Lake's contract, like the idea that, oh my God, the UNF athletic department is struggling under the crushing weight. Jimmy Lake's contract was like 15.6 million.
Oh yeah. No,
Jed Fish
that's
is
nothing.
making more than 3 times as much as Jimmy Lake was making. Obviously, in a longer contract, but more than double per season. It is like the arms race in college football has escalated so quickly. And look, there's got to be a logical conclusion to it at some point, especially when you can pay the players directly, and that's going to be competing more with for funding with what you're paying the coaches. But it's not great for uh major major college, for academics that this is where all the money is going to.
The
Like
academics are just gone.
the
Like I
coaches were
honestly, I
all
was
the coaches were always the highest paid state employees, but now it's like they're higher paid than private employees.
no, it's kind of wild. Like I feel like these contracts are comparable to NFL contracts right now, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of incredible just how quickly that's gone up. That Jed Fish, like I feel like there was a time where you would make way more money in the NFL than you could in college, and now that is certainly not the case. Like I would assume that the money that Jed Fish is making is probably pretty commensurate or better than some of the first-time coaches that we're going to see in the NFL.
It was amusing that Troy Dannon specifically brought up during the press conference to introduce Jed Fish on Tuesday that he hoped not to lose Jed Fish to any other college job, but was okay if he went to go coach the Seahawks.
Next week.
Not next week, down the road.
Troy Dannon has learned pandering to the city of Seattle very quickly. It's just like my long-term history since a month ago when I started caring about the Seahawks. The concept, I was thinking about this, and I feel like colleges in general, there's that thing about grade inflation at colleges. I feel like we've given up on the idea of higher learning and have turned colleges basically like capitalism has happened to universities.
Yeah, that's true.
Universities are factories that deliver you degrees, and the degrees are based upon are ranked or whatever, but like your grades don't matter, the learning doesn't matter. You are paying a college a certain amount of money to receive a degree from that college. It is an investment because then the value of the college, I was thinking of this, the value of the college in their rankings and the better grades that you get or whatever, the more people that they churn out, then you go get jobs, and then you donate more money back to the college. So it incentivizes colleges to just churn out as many successful people as possible to go get good jobs to give the money back to colleges. But like they're degree factories ultimately.
But also successful in a specific type of way because, certainly you can be successful leading a nonprofit. You can be very successful in, the government sector. Those probably, and that probably has its benefits to the college as well, certainly if you're in the government sector and controlling the funding to them. But those don't create the same degree of giving as encouraging everyone to go work in tech and be venture cap.
Well, then you use sports teams as basically your marketing. Like Ivy Leagues don't need sports teams as the marketing. They have the Ivy League as their marketing. But like the sports teams ultimately are just they've instead of like they are paying money 7.7 million or whatever to Jed Fish as football coach, but what they are paying Jed Fish 7.7 million dollars to is to market the University of Washington and to sell merchandise for the University of Washington. That is ultimately what Jed Fish is being paid for.
And let's hope that he can celebrate their academically prowess.
Yeah.
All right, we've got a lot to get to. Let's get into it. Starting with it's the return of our search for Seattle's best IPA. I have finally
Hello.
gone to the effort of getting an IPA that was not previously in our search, and that's from our friends at Old Stove Brewing, the West Coast IPA. We used our favorite hops for this classic style West Coast IPA, Warrior, Chinook, Mosaic, and Simcoe on the boil, then dry hopping with a huge dose of Cryo Simcoe, Citra, and Mosaic.
Cryo Simcoe.
Yeah, no. So that's certainly a lot of different hops they listed out there.
Yeah.
Old Stove has like expanded dramatically. So I recently learned that they have a place in Ballard, because there's a billboard for it when we were driving to Ballard. But then I learned on their website today that apparently they have a location in Interbay as well near the SPU campus. So that
Really?
was quite fascinating to learn.
There's a
I
couple
have
of new stoves. I mean, the original location is in the market, right?
correct.
It's like kind of maybe the best location view wise of any brewery in Seattle. You drive by it, especially viaduct days. Remember those? But you would drive by it and you'd look over and be like, I want to be there. Whatever I'm doing right now, I would rather be doing that than almost anything in the world. When you see Old Stove, especially on a sunny day in Seattle.
Yes, 100% agree. Strong agree. And yet the only time recently, the most recent time I've been outdoors was in like early or mid
Outdoors?
September, and it was
You haven't been outdoors since mid September?
at Old
It's
Stove.
been cold, but not for that long.
I've been at Old Stove, but only in the interior portion, not in the patio, because those spots are so coveted.
Yes.
I'm telling you. So we'll revisit this when I have a chance to drink it a little more. But let's get to our toasts, starting with a congratulations to Bobby Wagner, who was voted AP All-Pro second team at linebacker, his 10th career All-Pro appearance. Just another accolade in the Hall of Fame resume for Bobby Wagner in his return to Seattle this season. Also this week, speaking of Ballard, we have a congrats to inaugural Sounder James Riley, who was named head coach of Ballard FC.
Wow.
The reigning USL League Two champions won that title under interim coach Ethan O'Neill, who stepped down in November. So an opening there, and James Riley stepped in to fill it up the bridges.
There we go. James Riley voted by me the most likely professional athlete to just see around.
You think so?
Absolutely. I think I saw him around like 3 or 4 times. And he's the one who looks like John Legend, right?
Correct. Yes.
So you see him,
the thing
and
I
you're
always
like,
associate with James Riley.
you see him and you're like, oh, that's James Riley. You're like, wait, is that? No, okay, yeah, that's James Riley. You cycle through the people. You started John. You're like, okay, yeah.
You're like, I don't see Chrissy Teigen, so it must not be John Legend. It must be James Riley.
I don't know who else would be the. I feel like Sounders players in general. I don't know if I'd recognize a Kraken player necessarily, but like
I don't
Sounders
think
players are probably the highest tier of just some guys that you'd see.
Well, they don't have as many games. Also, they're in Renton now, so they're very near you. They're very accessible to you. But it's like the ex-Sounders who are just like really part of the community. I feel like you could.
I'm not saying part of the community. I mean, like you go to Lowe's and there's James Riley.
I feel like Brad Evans could be out there somewhere.
Brad Evans could be high.
You're at the Old Stove Brewing in the market. Brad Evans is over there.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised by that at all. I'm trying to think of other players. There was the one time I saw Ichiro on the street. See, the thing is, a lot of players you just don't even necessarily know.
I'm pretty sure Roger Levesque and some of the other early Sounders FC era Sounders players shared a house on the top of Queen Anne Hill that was along my commute to the Storm offices when I was working there. So I would see them all the time.
Roger Levesque's like a very notable looking person too.
Yes, he's easy to recognize. If anyone can confirm that Roger Levesque indeed lived on the top of Queen Anne Hill at that point, I would be amused to know.
Yeah, I think that's it. I could see Will Disley being around.
Well, checks out. That makes sense. As long as Will Disley could be a Seattle athlete, though. Pretty big cap hit for next season. All right, but that's not what we're discussing. Let's get into the roundup.
You had to go there? I'm just trying to celebrate a Husky and a Seahawk, and you have to talk about his cap hit. Also, Cade Otton making plays out there.
So many plays. He was getting thrown to constantly. Actually, we're not getting into the roundup.
I had to secretly cheer for him because Mateo was so aggressively cheering for the Eagles. In my head, I had to be like,
How did he handle his first playoff loss as an Eagles fan?
I had prepped him because I had a gut feeling after watching the Eagles for the last 5 weeks.
You saw them play Tyrod Taylor, and you're like, I don't know.
So in the morning, I was like, one of the fun things about the playoffs is that if you win, it's really exciting. But if you lose, the season does end. So there's really big stakes to every game. So every time that I play a game where the team could be one and done, I prep myself beforehand that the team might lose and don't go around hitting my parents. And so I'd already prepped him, and he freaked out at the beginning, very aggressive cheering. And there was a moment where it was just like, this ain't happening for the
when
Eagles.
they were down 13-0.
I think we even after the touchdown, like it got a little close, and I think it was the very beginning of the second half, and he was like, "Turn this off," and I was like, "You know what? I'm good with that. Like, you don't have to see the end of this Eagles season, Mateo." So, I
Have
do
you-
feel like
Has
the
he heard the
downfall-
news about Jason Kelsey potentially retiring though?
Oh no! Oh, he's gonna be devastated.
You didn't? Did you not know this?
No.
Yeah, that's a thing.
Uh, his Eagles fandom basically exactly aligned with when they got bad.
It is truly uncanny.
The game against the Chiefs was like the first game that I remember him being a big fan, which they should have lost and somehow won. And pretty much from that point forward, the Eagles were they weren't truly awful all of those games, but they were pretty close to it. And again, I think we had a strong feeling going into that one about what was going to happen, and they were finally put out of their misery.
Yeah. Not great.
Really
Sean
makes you think
Desai.
back to that big Seahawks win.
It really does. Yes, I agree. Sean Desai did nothing wrong.
They weren't football people who fired Pete Carroll.
Oh, we're going to discuss that. But right now, we have the return of another segment. It's time for our
Hello.
Seattle food update. Because earlier this evening, for the first time ever, I dined at Il Nido on El Kai, a place that previously we had repeatedly gotten during the early part of the pandemic. They operated as kind of a food pantry and offered sauces and dry pasta and focaccia to go.
Oh, the
And
focaccia was so good.
it's when you started making the northern the Genoese version of that fagasa, cooking that in the house all the time, which was a great time.
I haven't cooked that in a long time. You think it's Genoese, not Genovese?
It is Genoese, yes. Genovese is also a term, but that's the more preferred.
It was like when you
nomenclature.
pronounce Bobby Slovic, and I was like, you know what, Kevin, I think he's got it. I've read the name. I was like, he must be German. I'm accepting it.
I just guessed on that one because we were doing it in the moment. I have subsequently researched it is in fact Bobby Slovic.
It's almost never names are almost never as like ethnically pronounced as you and I want them to be. Honestly, we're just doing the extra work. That's like the extra 2% right there. Just mispronouncing somebody's name. He'll always be Franck Kepnong to me.
I gotta believe his name is actually Frank Kepnong, that he's just dumbing it down for the Americans.
Oh yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing. You and I, as graduates from the institution, University of Washington,
That degree factory,
very good degrees. A little headier than everybody else pronouncing Franck Kepnong's name.
Oh boy. Anyways, we went to Il Nido a lot during that period of time. Then they went back to in-person dining and stopped to offering takeout, which was a tremendous disappointment to us. And not for lack of interest, had just never made it back. There was like a reservation that I had last summer that conflicted with something else, so I was unable to go. But tonight, finally made the reservation, went, and let me tell you, it was fucking phenomenal.
Oh wow.
I would say this is probably better. I went to Canlis last fall. This was probably better than that as a meal.
Whoa. Are reservations hard to get there? No, they're not hard.
You just have to make a wait a little bit out. I mean, it's not like Moto Pizza level far out, but it is a little bit far out. Just every meal dish we had was so well balanced in terms of like the flavors and the the acidity and things like that. It's the stuff that they talk about on The Bear when they're constructing dishes or on Top Chef. Like they 100% nailed it at Il Nido.
Okay. How
And
much is Il Nido? What's the price point on it?
it's expensive, but it's not like super extensive. I mean, we ate a lot of food for two people just to kind of try out the menu a little bit. And then also not knowing exactly what the serving sizes were going to be like. It ended up being about $100 per person.
Per person, okay.
Yeah. So it's certainly high end, but it's not like the,
I guess
5-star
there
level.
aren't any like weekend reservations. Weekdays you can get reservations pretty much anytime. But
Yeah, I think it's
weekends
also
are a little bit more difficult.
more popular during the summer, obviously, as all of Alki is. And one of the things we discovered is, so it's located in what was originally a home, one of the first like homes on Alki built in 1904, It is not well insulated, as it turns out. So it's pretty
Oh,
chilly
boy.
in there on a 30 mid-30s evening like this, but probably a bit nicer, I would say, during the spring and fall.
What did you get there?
So we had the chicory salad, we had the burrata, and the focaccia is an opening course, and then we just did a pasta course and did. They had a ravioli filled with sausage that I saw on Instagram that they advertised as kind of a New Year's tradition that's
Oh,
eaten
yeah.
for good luck at New Year's, similar to like rice cakes and the Lunar New Year tradition. And then had tagliatelle with the ragu, which was outstanding.
Okay.
And then the last dish was like their version of cacio e pepe, which was probably the least spectacular of the dishes that we had, I would say.
It's like a pretty basic dish.
Yeah.
Saratoga cut ribeye. Damn, that looks so good.
So you seem to be under the impression, and I think Jan was as well when I talked to her about this, that when they stopped doing takeout, that they ceased operations entirely.
Well, you said that they closed or they changed ownership, right?
Yeah, so Mike Easton, who started Il Corvo, which did close operations in Pioneer Square, as well as Il Nido, uh, he moved away from Seattle, and not now it's 2022, so it's not last year anymore. Sold it, and Il Nido is now owned. Yes, I'm explaining time, Peltoncast time.
It's not 2022 though. That's
No, I'm saying last year. 2022 is no longer last year.
okay.
It still feels like last year. The new owners are longtime manager Cameron Williams and executive chef Katie Gallego, according to the story of my friend of the pod, third Pelton brother, Alicia Vermillion.
All right. I gotta go there right now. I'm
Yeah.
starving.
I don't think they're still open, sadly.
The double cut bone and ribeye for $162. 42 ounces when available. That looks so good. Oh my god.
I'm wondering if is that like a for the table situation?
42 ounces of ribeye.
Yeah.
If you have a weak disposition, maybe it is.
But you're not gonna want to
Maybe for you it's for the table.
okay. Look forward to you. I was eating the 42-ounce ribeye and doing pasta and focaccia.
$227.
All right, anyways, this has been the Peltoncast Discovers Il Nido is good.
I think we already knew El Nido was good.
We did. We discovered it was still open. You discovered it was still open. Let's get into the roundup, starting with the Mariners, who reached agreements with all 7 arbitration eligible players before Thursday's deadline. Projected starting infielders Ty France, Josh Rojas, and Luis Urias were all among that group. Starting pitcher Logan Gilbert, who's a Super 2 eligible. Relievers Trent Thornton and Justin Topa. And of course, Peltoncast favorite, Sam Onofrio Haggerty.
This all happened like pre everything with the Huskies and Pete Carroll. So it's sort of just like this news is faded to the sands of time.
You know what this is sort of like? So I don't know if you caught any of the Emmys on Monday night, which were airing opposites at Buccaneers Eagles game. Although I watched them after recorded. This was the Emmys that should have run in September because of the actors strike and the writers strike. And the eligibility for the Emmys runs on the network TV calendar. So like the end of it was June 2022 was the starting period.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of my 2022 feels like last year, the Bears season 1 was
Oh,
winning
it was the
all
Bears
the awards.
season 1 that was winning.
Yeah. Long after the Bears season 2 has come out.
That's really strange.
That's what this week's podcast feels like. Well, speaking of things that happened in between those periods of time, the Kraken ran their winning streak to 9 games, the longest in franchise history with road wins at Washington and Columbus, before finally seeing both that streak in a 13-game point streak and on MLK Day at Pittsburgh with a 3-0 loss. They then lost 5-2 on the back end of a back-to-back Tuesday night at the New York Rangers. Kraken tied for 9th in the West, 2 points out of a final playoff spot. We're a little bit past the midway point, but figured now with this winning streak coming to an end would be a good time to kind of check in, big picture on where the Kraken are. Their shooting percentage entering Tuesday was up to 21st in the NHL after lagging in the bottom 5 for much of the season. They're still slightly underperforming their shot statistics that paint them as an average team or better, but the winning streak was really more about their hot goaltending. They allowed just 1.4 goals per game during those 9 games, less than half of their 3.3 average beforehand. For comparison, Winnipeg leads the NHL by allowing 2.3 goals per game. It was almost all Joey Decord, who started 8 of the 9 games in goal before getting a rest on Tuesday night with the busy schedule. The Road Warrior Kraken wrap up this trip Thursday in Edmonton. They'll start a 4-game homestand Sunday against the Maple Leafs. They will do so without Matty Beniers, who was placed on IR with an upper body injury. They also played that back-to-back without Andrei Burakovsky and Vince Dunn, who are day-to-day.
Okay, so the Sounders are in a solid place overall, especially where they started the season. Not necessarily a guarantee that they make the playoffs, but obviously the long winning streak is helpful in getting toward that goal. And
they're in the mix.
You would assume for the rest of the season that they'll be hovering around a playoff spot.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that'll be interesting is how they approach the trade deadline. Now, the nice thing about the NHL vis-a-vis the NBA in particular is like the trade deadline is so much later that you kind of get a lot of information about where your team is. I don't know that they really have a lot of expiring contracts that they would be looking to trade away, even if they decided that the playoffs were, not or at least an extended playoff run like last season was a long shot, but. I don't know if they'll be buyers at this point necessarily either. So, but again, they've got a few weeks to decide that.
Okay. I mean, they kind of overperformed last season. This is maybe a little bit more on the timeline with where the Kraken should have been. I just don't want to approach this as like a disappointing season so far.
Yeah, I mean, this is about where the statistical projections had them on the fringes of the playoffs. So it's not terribly surprising from that standpoint. They've just gotten there in a very unusual way with the longest, or I think tied the longest losing streak in franchise history. Obviously, there's not a lot of seasons, but did that and then had the longest winning streak in franchise history.
It's kind of easy right now.
True. But compared to the expansion season, it's not necessarily that easy for the longest losing streak. It's the winning streak that's easier to do. The NHL trade deadline is March 8th. So, yeah, it's still almost 2 months to go until that one. That's like a full month after the NBA trade deadline. It is like 4 weeks to the day after. Seattle Sounders back in action. They opened 2024 training camp on Tuesday. They will spend a week here at Starfire before traveling to Marbella, Spain for 2 weeks of training and preseason friendlies. They will be back in Seattle February 13th ahead of the start of their MLS schedule and will then move training to their new headquarters in Renton.
Would that we all could travel to Marbella, Spain for the next 2 weeks.
You'd like to do that before coming back to Renton?
I actually would not mind if you could just fast forward, go to Spain for a couple of weeks. I pulled up the weather in Marbella, Spain.
Oh, that's the kind of research we need here on the Peltoncast.
Well, you know about the rains in Spain, right? Currently raining right now in Spain.
But is Marbella on the plane, though?
I would have to assume so, based upon it being raining right now. But by next week, next Monday, 62 degrees and sunny through Friday, literally not a cloud in sight all week in Marbella, up to 68 next Friday. Just take me with you. I'm already in Rent, Sounders.
I like that would make it easier to take.
They could just drop me back at home on the way back from Spain. They don't have to go super far out of their way or anything. This is the other alternate world. The previous alternate world, I'm a college football coach.
Now I hear.
That one is for the pay. This one is for the trip to Spain.
What are you doing for the Sounders while you're on this trip?
I think providing
Ball
good
boy?
vibes. Hot takes are needed. I am so there. If there's any music management needs that they have along the way, honestly, I had those so covered. Anybody needs me to explain sound exchange to them, I can definitely do that.
Marbella is part of Andalusia. I didn't know that. Okay. And
Andalusia.
It's not far from the Rock of Gibraltar.
Slicing up eyeballs. Well, where is that? What part of Spain? Is it in the plains?
It's the southern coast. It would not be described as the plains. It's a beach town.
Wow.
So
is that a limerick? I would never lie.
don't think it's Oldenburg.
No.
It just says mostly. It doesn't say they exclusively.
Okay. I do like that they leave it open.
Podcast has
Do you-
already
do you-
gone in many unexpected directions.
There's the Fleetwood Mac song, Thunder Only Happens When It's Raining, right? I remember, do you remember you and I talking about this like 20 years ago? Where it's like, there are definitely times when thunder happens when it's not raining.
It is true.
It's like,
Isn't there even a term, dry lightning? Isn't that
Yeah.
a thing?
yeah. So I think Fleetwood Mac, just a note. Thunder mostly happens when it's raining. If we could take a little something from the limerick about Spain.
Wow. Oh, really owned Fleetwood Mac with that one.
Yeah. I mean, it's just factually incorrect.
A little more Sounders news. They extended midfielder Josh Atencio through 2027. The 21-year-old emerged as a starter at defensive midfield late last season, starting 7 of the 8 final regular season matches, as well as their playoff loss to LAFC. So good news to get a promising young player signed up for multiple more seasons. Seattle Reign FC doing much the same with forward Bethany Balser. They extended her contract through 2025, which had previously been a mutual option. Reign still a little bit further away from beginning their preseason training. But we'll see when we get there whether Laura Harvey is coaching the team. The Times of London reported that the Reigns coach, a native of England, is one of the leading contenders to replace new U.S. women's national team manager Emma Hayes as head coach of Chelsea Football Club. Harvey signed a contract extension in July that takes her deal with the Reign through 2025. Plenty of other candidates there, so I don't think this is a huge concern, but a possible opportunity there for Laura Harvey. And perhaps that would also start a chain reaction that would end with Alabama State losing their coach.
South Alabama, thank you.
South Alabama, the joke.
Disrespect to the Jaguars.
Oh, dear.
Wow.
The joke.
If only Mateo heard you.
He's
Seattle... in on the nickname thing now, by the way. We do a thing in the car where it's just like Luca will name a conference and Mateo has to try to name. This is just out of control. There's 2 of them. In fact, if you count
3.
you, there's 3 of them.
There's 3 of us. I confused South Alabama and Alabama State, so maybe I
Yeah,
don't
pathetic.
qualify anymore.
You're washed up. Luca will go through and name a conference, and Mateo has to try to guess every single team in that conference.
And he has to guess like the current conference, not like the classic conference.
Future tense, yes.
Oh, but
I mean, it's not that hard to keep track of.
I very recently learned that Liberty is in Conference USA today. Or now, like it's like, oh, okay, that's a thing that happens.
We're not going that deep with the 7-year-old, but like,
Okay,
you know, he sticks to the bigger conferences. He doesn't get into the AAC and the CUSA.
I've been playing around a lot on the 247sports.com transfer tracker for obvious reasons, and UW, because it's 2024, is already listed in the Big Ten there.
Oh, there we go. The transfer tracker has no good news for you. I'm so sad. So sorry to say.
Oh, it had 1, maybe 2 pieces of good news.
Did it?
Yeah, we'll get
Okay.
to it.
Okay.
We'll
the
get
transfer
to-
the transfer tracker is just like, fuck you.
I don't think the transfer
You don't want
tracker's
you have no business here, sir.
personally targeting me.
The transfer tracker is like, there's an X in the corner for a reason.
All right, lastly,
What you want is you want the Wayback Machine when you click on the 247 Sports transfer tracker. Think about what was.
I did because we were curious whether Kalen DeBoer had brought any players with him from Fresno State. Look at the 2022 transfers. That was some GTs.
There you go.
Shouts to Wayne Talapapa. All right. Lastly, on our summer sports part of the rundown, Sunday is the opening day of WNBA free agency. The Storm took care of their biggest impending free agent by extending Jewel Lloyd last summer. That leaves Gabby Williams, who's unlikely to play in the WNBA in 2024 due to the combination of the prioritization role and playing for the host country in the Paris Olympics, as the Storm's only unrestricted free agent. The Storm announced Tuesday they've extended a qualifying offer to reserve forward Joyner Holmes, making her a restricted free agent, while not yet doing so for veteran guard Yvonne Turner. Without a qualifying offer, Turner would also become unrestricted as a free agent. So we did the WNBA mock off-season exercise a few weeks ago at herhoopstats.com.
Speaking of things that had no good news for you.
No, this year they had.
Oh, hello.
I mean, they didn't necessarily have great news. Beta Stewart didn't come back, but I tried
What was her buyout?
instead of buyout
Coach the
situation.
Seahawks? So
Uh,
in your mock off season,
but guess who I did bring to Seattle? Courtney Vandersloot
There we
traded a
go.
first-round pick to the New York Liberty to bring Sloot back to Seattle.
Why would the Liberty make that trade?
They wanted to get better defensively in the backcourt, so they signed Natasha Cloud from Washington as a free agent and needed to trade Vandersloot to have both playing time and salary cap space for her.
Okay, let's take a step back into the real world. And this isn't your situation where, God, where was the one where LeBron James signed with Houston on that mock off season? It was like literally LeBron James had been signed to LA in everybody's heads for months, and it was like Houston. But in the real world, is there a possibility of that happening, that the Liberty would want to move on from Courtney Vandersloot?
I think it's a long shot, but their guard defense was a pretty significant liability in the playoffs with Vandersloot and Sabrina Ionescu in the backcourt. So I don't think it's inconceivable. I mean, the Storm wouldn't be the only team that would want Vandersloot in that scenario where she became available. One of the interesting takeaways of that exercise, one of my bold predictions of this last year, which we'll see if this was also insufficiently bold, was that the Storm were going to sign Skylar Diggins-Smith to be that veteran point guard that they are probably looking for. But one of the takeaways from this exercise is like a lot of teams were very in on Skylar Diggins-Smith. And, we'll see if the actual market for her is robust. But a lot of teams need point guards, and that's going to be an interesting situation for the Storm. Some of the other options out there, you have Jordan Canada, who started her career in Seattle. Didn't seem thrilled with how it ended on either side in Seattle, but she really dramatically improved, was runner-up for most improved player last year.
Really?
And added an outside shot. So she actually fits much better with the
I really
Storm
like
now.
Jordan Canada.
Yeah, so I think that's a long shot, but she is out there in free agency. And then you've got Courtney Williams, who developed into a point guard last year in Chicago, as a possibility. So I would expect them to go after a veteran point guard. My other target, in this mock off season, traded Kia Nurse to the LA Sparks so that we were able to offer two players protected contracts and add a little more cap space, and then use that cap space to go out and sign Australian forward Alana Smith, who had a breakout season with the Chicago Sky last year. So the idea being there to move Ezzy Megbagor to center and have Alana Smith start next to her in an all Aussie front court.
All right. So the pick that you said you traded for Courtney Vandersloot in the mock off season, was that the fourth pick?
No, it was
it's a different pick.
I traded the 2024 pick, or the 2025 pick, I should say.
Why would you do that?
Under the logic that,
was it protected?
no, you can't protect picks in the WNBA, which is not great. But under the
You're the worst
logic,
GM of all time.
under the logic that Caitlin Clark will go back, it will come out, I should say, this year, that most of these players will ultimately come out, and then if you added Courtney Vandersloot and another free agent, the Storm would be good enough that you're in the low end playoff mix. You're not giving up a lottery pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll just throw in DJ Moore. Are you kidding me?
I don't think the Panthers threw in DJ Moore. It was a risk. I agree.
I don't like that risk at all.
Also, it was a mock-off
How,
season.
how good is Courtney Vandersloot?
I don't have to deal with the reality of it.
You have to deal with the reality of it right here, sir.
Oh wow, I'm on the hot seat.
But
Jody Allen's gonna fire me.
let's assume that Caitlin Clark and the entire class, right? Let's assume the entire class comes out this year. Who's left next year?
Who's the best 2025 prospect? I'd have to look at it. I'm sure there's someone I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but like if you look at the best players in college basketball right now, it's all the players who have eligibility, who have the chance to come out this year, and then Juju Watkins. So there's a freshman right now at USC, and is maybe the most exciting player.
Juju Watkins can't come out after next year.
For at least 2 years. I haven't researched whether she would have junior eligibility, but she's long down the road.
This would be the season. God, the Storm fucked this up so bad. this would be the season that the Storm have a very good chance, if they don't go all in on the 2024 season, that they would have a very good chance of having the first or second pick.
Yes, because now they would be starting with a bad record rather than starting with a good record. And it's interesting because one of the other teams that had a record in this ballpark last year, I think worse than them, was Phoenix. Phoenix does not have their 2025 draft pick outright because they swapped it to, of all teams, New York.
Oh my God.
The Liberty, really. They're pretty good at this.
Well, I'm going to say all that sounds quite bad for the Storm.
I mean, again, it's a mock-off season. We'll see how things actually play out. I do think they're going to try to win.
Season, the situation that they have themselves set up in is their chances of getting, and you never know, right? Maybe the player that they get with the fourth pick will end up developing into a star. But
if everyone comes out, again, they'll get someone really quite good with the fourth pick.
Okay. I guess that just pretty much has to be the hope.
Yeah. But one of the oddities of WNBA free agency, as we've talked about in the past, is all of this plays out before you know who's going to enter the draft. So you know what pick you're going to have, but you kind of have to plan as if you don't know which player that might be, which is how I approach things.
Why don't they not do that?
Well, just realistically, they can't. The women's college season ends like 2 weeks before you start training camp. You couldn't have free agency in those 2 weeks.
And then they're instantly with the team.
Correct.
Okay.
I guess you could force players to declare for the draft in like December. I think they're in the business of forcing players not to declare for the draft. All right. Well, speaking of women's college basketball, rough one Sunday for the UW women. After opening conference play in December with a win in Pullman, Huskies have now lost all 3 conference games in January, split the Apple Cup series with each team winning on the other's home court, as Washington State got the 72-59 win Sunday in Heck-Ed. UW was outscored 61-41 after taking a lead after the first quarter. Delia Daniels had 23 points on 9 of 12 shooting, 8 rebounds, but El Ladine with 14 was the only other Husky in double figures, as WSU had 6 players score at least 8 points. They'll try to bounce back at home again this weekend against the Arizona schools. Our old friend Adia Barnes' Wildcats are 2-3 in conference play with a pretty young lineup. Since blowing out Arizona State in December, their 4 Pac-12 games have been decided by a combined 7 points. They lost 3 of those, by 1 at number 5 Colorado, in double OT at Oregon State, and by 2 at Oregon, but did upset number 15 Utah at home, also in overtime. So if we know anything about this game, it will likely come down to the wire and be very exciting on Friday night. On Sunday, it's Arizona State, who's still building under second-year coach Natasha Adair. Their 8 wins are as many as all of last season, but they're 0-5 in Pac-12 play, and the closest of those losses was by 12 points. So this one's a must-win for the Huskies.
Okay.
Well, speaking of must-wins, UW men's basketball got one of those on Thursday as they beat Arizona State 82-67, but very much did not Sunday at UCLA, losing 73-61, their worst loss of the season by far, to a team ranked number 118 in KenPom, entering the game after having lost 90-44 at Utah on Thursday. Did you watch this game?
I watched some of it. There must have been NFL on. I started paying more attention to. At some point, I was just like, you know what? I'm good. I'm good on this. We have Jed Fish. I'm just going to be happy with the University of Washington for now. And then I kind of pulled it back up in the second half, and the Huskies were still down 10 with like 4 or 5 minutes left. And I was like, I don't need to do this to myself. In fact, it was like Mateo turning off the Eagles game. It's like, you know what? I'd rather not see the end of this.
You showed the same level of maturity as your 7-year-old.
I actually was the one who turned off the Eagles game for him. But that's what we're doing in 2024. We're just turning off things we don't want to see. But when UCLA was losing at Utah, it was so shocking that I was like, this game is so bad that it must be so completely demoralizing for the university in general. And also, I know that they're going to beat UW on Sunday.
I deeply know, deep in my bones.
There has just never been a thing that has been more set in stone than UW losing that game to UCLA after losing. They lost 90-44. Like, to me, I was like, man, Mick Cronin, I assume that he's still their coach, right?
Yes.
I assume he has pretty secure job stability based upon their success. Like, he has been the most successful UCLA coach for a very long time.
He's the first person to take them to the Final Four since they won the national championship under Jim Herrick. So, yeah.
Steve Lavin never went to the Final Four?
I don't think so. They went to the Sweet 16 a lot, but I don't think they ever went to the Final Four.
I'm pretty sure they went to the Final Four with him one time in like 2004 or something. I think they like snuck in.
I mean, maybe
or 2006, somewhere around there.
Maybe 2006 was Ben Howland. They did go to the Final. Oh, you're right. They did go to the Final Four back-to-back years under Ben Howland. Yeah, you're right.
I was gonna say that's definitely wrong.
Okay,
but at the same time, having a loss that devastating is pretty brutal, and it makes me wonder.
Did they go 3 consecutive years to the Final Four?
I think you're forgetting how good UCLA was.
Wild.
But they were never that good. They just were good in the NCAA tournament.
I just forgot about the Ben Howland year entirely. I was just thinking of Steve Alford and Steve Lavin.
But when I was thinking about Mick Cronin's job security, it reminded me that a coach also lost to that UCLA team that lost 90-44. And right now, it's not Troy Dannon's guy. Troy Dannon's kind of feeling himself. He had a pretty good coaching search for Jed Fish. Felt good, looked good, made his stamp. Right now, he's taking victory laps. He's joking about the Seahawks. And I think that the hop extension meter is at 0. Right now, I think it is NCAA tournament or bust, and it might not even happen with the NCAA tournament.
I mean, I think probably realistically, it was always going to take an NCAA tournament run for Mike Hopkins to remain the Huskies head coach beyond this season. I mean, what I would tell you is Peltoncast golden rule here. Like, if the Huskies play well enough from this point forward to make the NCAA tournament,
yes,
by definition, they will have gone on a pretty impressive run that will feel very differently about the program if that happens. I would also say, I do think there's an element like the turnovers against UCLA were extremely frustrating. I didn't see the first half, but based on listening to everyone who was and just watching the score was frustrating enough. They finished with 19 for the game, 6 for Severe Wheeler, 5 for Braxton Mia, who, like, that's really kind of one of the stories of the season with this Frank Kepnong injury lasting an indeterminate period of time now, day to day for the entire season. Frank Kepnong. There is also the element where a lot of the difference between Thursday, where they kind of beat up on Arizona State, and Sunday was 3-point shooting. Like, this is why, to me, the whole like obsessing over individual game outcomes in a long season with basketball is kind of meaningless. On Thursday, they went 13 of 25 from 3. Arizona State shot 4 of 17. On Sunday, they shot 6 of 25 from 3. UCLA, an extremely poor shooting team, shot 6 of 14. And like, even if you go back to Thursday for UCLA, they shot 3 of 17 at Utah. Utah shot 52% from 3. They were 13 of 25. Like, so much of the shit is just whether threes go in or not.
That's fine, but they don't have wiggle room right now. They've lost too many games to be like, well, they shot bad on threes in that game. And they lost too bad of a team. UCLA is not like a normal loss where it's within range. Well, I mean, KenPom must have had the Huskies winning this game by a handful of points.
Let me see here. I mean, yes, the answer is yes. Let me see what the projection was. It's only Huskies by 4. Home court advantage is pretty important in college basketball in a way that people underestimate.
Even still, like, what did they end up losing by 10, 11?
12. So yeah, I mean,
12?
they dropped 10 spots in KenPom
against a team that had just lost 90-44 against Utah. They didn't just lose, they lost embarrassingly. Like, they lost so badly that I told you I had to click on the game to make sure that the score wasn't wrong.
Yes, they were doubled up I mean, it's wild. So Ken Palm still has the Huskies finishing 10-10 in conference. I don't think that's going to be nearly enough to put them on the bubble at this point. I think they got to go 12-8 at worst, which would mean going 10-4 the rest of the conference season.
It's bleak. And this is not the way that this team was supposed to be. And they didn't look this way all season, but now that they've gotten to Pac-12 play, Severe Wheeler did not have a good game against UCLA, and some of those turnovers, you're just like, what are you doing right now? It was very sloppy. They're supposed to be an experienced team. That's the other thing, is it's not like, I mean, Hop has recruited fairly well for the class coming in, but this is an older team right now. It's not like, well, we're just getting started.
That's not Michael Porter Jr. walking through that door.
UW wouldn't care at all anyway, even if it was. Was it Jen Cohn who fired Lorenzo Romar?
It was, yes. As a reminder, hiring is a very small sample size.
Firing is not a small sample size.
No, I think that is a small sample size as well.
It's a much larger sample size of Lorenzo Romar's success at UW. She didn't hire Lorenzo Romar, though, right?
No, obviously. She inherited Lorenzo Romar, who was hired by, which athletic director hired Lorenzo Romar? I think it was it Barbara Hedges still?
Wow.
Who's
the guy after it? Todd Turner? Is that the right name?
Todd Turner, yeah.
Was there somebody in between there?
No.
Okay. Athletic directors like to hire their own coaches. And I honestly, I trust Troy Dannon with this hiring more than I would trust a lot of people. I mean, I think what he did with Jed Fish was pretty impressive, and the commitment that they showed to really finding a winning coach. They went in and got basically the number one name out there.
I don't think they got Pete Carroll, but they sort of did.
They kind of did. And also, Troy Dannon has the relationship with Pete. He developed I don't know when it started or whatever, but he worked to develop a relationship with Pete Carroll. He did it. He's done a pretty good job so far. Like, Troy Dannon seems like he's somebody he's trying to fucking win.
Well, as opposed to these other athletic directors who are hoping to lose when they hire their coaches.
There's a certain level of aggressiveness.
I suppose so. Should we shift into talking about UW football here?
What else are we going to talk about?
Oh, we do have to talk about UW men's basketball. Their upcoming week in the Bay Area as they continue this road trip. Thursday at Cal, who's 6-11 under first-year head coach Mark Madsen, but competitive 2-4 in conference play. They lost to Arizona State by 2 at home, and two of their 3 other losses are by less than double digits. Their wins came at UCLA, of course, and by 4 at home over Colorado. It's a pretty good offense led by NBA prospect Jalen Tyson on the wing, but they cannot stop anybody defensively. Stanford is 9-7, but boasts a win over Arizona as part of their 4-2 conference start. They also took down Utah at home, but somehow lost at home to Arizona State before beating Arizona.
This is Pac-12. Don't say somehow. You understand how Pac-12 works. Basketball.
That's a good point. Cordell shot 39% from 3, led by 53% on decent volume from stretch 4 Brandon Angel. So keep an eye on him. Andrei Stojakovic, son of Peja, only shooting okay this season, but playing a key role for them off the bench.
Wow. Okay.
As a reminder, we're all very old.
I mean, these are 2 must-win games, though.
Yeah. And Stanford is a game that they are not favored to win because, again, home court advantage is pretty significant. All right, let's talk UW football. So Tuesday was Jed Fish's introductory press conference. They've also now announced 4 assistant coaches, all of them joining him from Arizona. Jimmy Doherty is passing game coordinator and quarterback coach. He previously served as the wide receiver coach at UW under Steve Sarkisian from 2009 and 2012, adding pass game coordinator title his final season before getting the offensive coordinator job at San Jose State. Scotty Graham is running back coach. Jordan Paopao is tight end coach and special teams coordinator. Paopao was at UW from 2011 through 2019. I didn't realize he was there that long, working his way from a grad assistant to tight end coach under both Sark and Chris Peterson. I think there might have been 2 coaches who got retained from the Sark staff when Chris Peterson came in, and he was one of them. And then Jason Kawafusi is run game coordinator and defensive line coach. He coached defensive ends and outside linebackers at Arizona, so a slightly different role for him, as well as Tyler Owens as director of strength and conditioning. Three other Arizona coaches were at Fish's introductory press conference, those being offensive coordinator and offensive line coach Brennan Carroll, wide receiver coach Kevin Cummings, and cornerback coach John Richardson. It's also been reported that director of player personnel Matt Doherty, who we talked about on the emergency pod as an important figure here, came to Seattle with Fish. So chance is pretty good that we see all of them on staff, although there are rumblings that Cummings could be in line for the offensive coordinator job at Arizona under their replacement for Fish, as they hired Brett Brennan, Arizona alum, to replace him.
Seems a little strange to me that he would be at the introductory press conference
I agree.
and not be pretty confident about a job. I would assume that is basically just there's still negotiations happening over salary right now, and that's it.
Well, you've got one way you could get more leverage.
Yeah. No, that seems fair. I mean, I think this is basically chalk as far as kind of who we were expecting to come over, which is nice. I mean, this was part of it. We talked about Brendan Carroll in particular being an important person to bring into the program. We saw Pete Carroll at UW today.
It's great.
It is instant that it's happening. And the thing is, everybody loves Pete Carroll.
As long as he's not making fourth down decisions for you, team, you love Pete Carroll.
I mean, just everything about Pete Carroll is great as a person, as long as he's not making decisions about football specifically, and how to structure a defense. So having him in the building,
how to use second round picks.
Having him in the building is a huge deal for the program in general, and it's going to be helpful in general. You know, there was a moment where I was like, oh God, Brendan Carroll is going to get the head coach job at Arizona. So I'm happy that didn't end up happening. Who knows long term how I'll be here, but Pete Carroll is going to be a fixture of the UW program. We're going to see him on the sideline at UW games next year, and that is going to be very, very fun. And when he's having those conversations with recruits, when he's having those conversations with transfers, it is a big deal having Pete Carroll in the house.
Yeah, Procure made the point that the Pete Carroll, even though he's technically an advisor, which by the day it becomes more clear that was just like, if someone else is going to hire this guy as head coach, we're going to trade him and not, let him go there for free by firing him.
I think it also softened the blow.
Sure. It made it easier to trot him out there for the press conference and, give him his moment of glory, as opposed to if it was just like, see you later, Pete, don't let the door hit you. Jed Fish said former Seahawks coach Pete Carroll is going to, but anyway, what Brock Huard said is like him being at the Seahawks facility, it's too soon, but him being at the Husky facility, that's like the perfect role right now for Pete Carroll.
It's kind of incredible how this worked out.
So great. Jed Fish was asked about it, obviously, during the press conference on Tuesday, and said that Carroll is a mentor close by and ready to help. And one way he can help is by calling a bunch of recruits and also current players who are considering possible transfers.
I get the feeling that is happening very, very quickly. That Pete is having those conversations right now, just being around. You know what I mean? You walk into the building. Oh, Pete Carroll's here. What a surprise. Oh, he won a Super Bowl national championship. Pete Carroll just happened to be in the building. So I think that is a very important thing right now as they kind of scramble to get the roster in place. It's going to be especially important. I don't think we can dwell too much on this particular time period and even next season necessarily. I do think when we talk about Jed Fish, we talk about this coaching staff, it has to be a multiple year growth and plan for what they're doing.
100% agreed. Yeah.
And I think I was mentioning this to you about Sark at Texas, right? Obviously, there's a lot of talent in the building at Texas when Sark took over. He went 5-7 in his first year, and it was just incremental. And you see like the players that are now going to Texas, Isaiah Bond transferring there, Silas Bolden transferring there. Like Texas is in some ways the number one program in the country at this very moment. And Coach Sark built it up. There was one fine year, or there was one down year, there was one fine year, and then they were in the playoff. So if that's kind of what Jed Fish could build here, it's, Texas is a bigger program than UW, but like it's something that can be built year over year. And I don't think it needs to be we expect next season the Huskies to be as good as they were this year, or even the Huskies to be as good as Arizona would have been, or the Huskies 2 years ago. This is a rebuilding year. We're looking for the offense to be pretty solid, and we're looking for glimpses of the future, built program building stuff, and then the next year growing from that.
I agree with that. I like that Jed Fish really emphasized his NFL experience is a tool in recruiting and the fact that they play a pro style offense and defense. I do think that's been an important part of UW's pitch to recruits for a long period of time is look, we don't necessarily get the most talented, recruits in terms of star rankings, but players here consistently develop and go to the NFL. And you look around and watch the playoff games, and you mentioned K-Dot, Puka Nacua, obviously didn't finish his career at UW, but setting the rookie receiving record for playoff yards after having this amazing rookie season.
Oh no,
that he did.
I would be reminding Teteroa McMillan exactly where Puka Nacua started college and exactly where Roma Dunze is going to be drafted. And the last Arizona receiver was drafted in the first round.
I don't know. Maybe there was one that I just don't remember.
It's been a while. Wait, where did RJ Howard go? Was he Arizona State? Anyway, it's been a while. Was that his name? RJ Howard? I swear that was the dude's name.
Doesn't ring a bell to me. I got to be honest with you.
Anyway.
Let's see here.
RJ Soward was his name.
Oh, okay.
Oh, he went to USC?
Do you know how many first round picks all time there have been from the University of Arizona?
I don't.
You know who the last, actually, let's put it this way. Do you know when the last time was an Arizona player was drafted in the first round?
There had to be one post-Trunk candidate.
There is one, precisely one post-Trunk
There's
candidate.
only one?
Antoine Kaysen in 2008, the 27th pick.
I remember that. So, I mean, it's kind of like a lot of their better players also were, like Foles was drafted in the second round, I want to say, and Gronk was a second-round pick.
Right. That's still wild, though.
So UW will have more first-round picks this year than Arizona has had in the last 26 years.
In all likelihood, yes.
Wow. I mean, there's an outside shot that UW will have 4 this year.
You're thinking Odunze, Penix, two of the other receivers, or one of the other receivers
possibly
in Braylon?
Possibly Braylon Trice.
Oh, Braylon Trice, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, basically guaranteed to have, I would say 2, not calling the specific players, but 2 is almost a lock. Odunze is a lock for the first round, and then somebody else is probably going in the first round. But I've seen mocks that have all 4 of those players.
So the Huskies, since the last Washington player was drafted, or since the last Arizona player was drafted in the first round, I should say, have had 9 first-round picks.
When they've all been relatively recent, right?
Yeah. I mean, there was Jake Locker in 2011, but other than him, yes.
So
they're all 2015 or no. I guess they were over time. Trufant was 2013.
Wow, Desmond Trufant. I forgot he was a first-round pick.
Yeah.
Look, I would just be making those players aware of that. That's it.
But you've not only got Jed Fish's perspective as someone who worked in the NFL, you've got Pete Carroll's perspective. So that's pretty cool.
And I also think just even what happened this last year, like Arizona's been building something very good, and many teams around the country. This is not specifically just about Arizona recruits, but there is something about having a person on the Heisman podium at number 2 in the college football playoff. And I don't think Kalen DeBoer deserves, you can't just look at that and be like, that's all Kalen DeBoer, because it's the program, it is the institution that happened to. So
yeah, it's also the platform. So yeah, I think that's fair.
I had one other thought on the Jed Fish hiring. I don't know how much we really need to talk about this. I feel like we've talked about it a lot, but I was thinking about that should be very thankful about this, because I think what we really saw was there's the report about the Arizona hiring Jed Fish wasn't a priority for Arizona. And I think ultimately what that meant was Arizona just doesn't have the kind of money to go out and pay a coach like Jed Fish in the way that UW does right now, especially with UW going to the Big Ten. And I do think we're seeing a pretty clear divide of Big 12 is sub Big Ten and SEC. There are tiers to the conferences now. It is the SEC, it is the Big Ten, and then it's everybody else.
There were
I think-
already tiers to the conferences. It's just they're in sharper relief now.
Exactly. And it's financial, but it's also prestige and clout. Jed Fish is one of, aside from, I don't know how you'd really classify the ACC at the moment. The ACC is sort of like tier one of that, but the Big 12 lost their two biggest programs this year. So of the Big 12 coaches, he was probably the most desirable coach left of almost anybody else. And you could debate the Kansas coaches, etc.
I think
To
they were
me-
all in the same tier. I do think it has become more evident that the other thing that I think made Fish stand out, that you talked about it, was the diversity of his resume. The fact that Lance Leipold and Chris Kleiman had coached at a handful of different schools. Jed Fish, for better or worse, like, he has experience all sorts of different places, including in the Big Ten during the time he spent at Michigan. And I think that was very attractive to Troy Dannon and to UW.
I think the age piece is also underrated in this. He's about a decade younger than Chris Kleiman and Lance Leipold as well. And
One of them is 56. One of them is 59. Jed Fish is 49.
so he's not 49,
Isn't he?
47 years old.
Okay.
So being about a decade or a little bit more younger means that there's just like a little bit more vitality there, but also you're just, if everything goes right, everything is the perfect scenario. That's another 10 years coaching on the end. That it's unlikely, and that's not what you should be planning for necessarily, but it is a helpful thing. But the thing that I was thinking about was there are these tiers to the conferences. And the number one team that should be thinking about how thankful they are in this very moment to the University of Washington is the team from down south in Oregon. Because do you know what happened this offseason? They kept their coach, and Dan Lanning, probably the most desirable young coach around the country, because one day back last August, the University of Washington called them and said, "We're taking this deal for the Big Ten. We are going to the Big Ten, and you better join us," basically. Take it or leave it. We are going. By doing that in that exact moment, you can look at all the little dominoes, games, individual things that happen. The Washington Huskies convincing Oregon, who are happy to be in the Pac-10 as it was, which would have been a sub-conference. Everything else, irrelevant of Oregon, Washington, all the movement that happened after that, had they kept it together as the Pac-10, with USC and UCLA leaving this next year, the Big Ten would still be the Big Ten, and the SEC would still be the SEC. The Pac-10, as it were, would be on that same tier with the Big 12, maybe even lower. The smaller amount of money coming long-term. UW, by making that move, by making that call, saved Dan Lanning in Oregon by letting him know that he was going to the Big Ten next year. Him being a Big Ten coach is why he's at Oregon. If not, he might be the head coach of Alabama this very moment, and if not there, somewhere else. So it could have been Texas A&M, could have been somewhere else. But by making that call, UW saved Oregon, Dan Lanning, long term.
Okay.
It's a fascinating thing to think about.
There's a lot of dominoes right now. At
This
point.
whole coaching carousel about how it all trickles back to that move, and where UW is, the hiring of Jed Fish. I don't, if the Pac-10 is together, Kalen DeBoer up and leaves for Alabama, I don't know if Jed Fish is going across conference to do that.
I would agree with that.
So it is kind of interesting just to see how, and look, there's a butterfly effect to all this stuff, but that decision that happened put UW and Oregon, UCLA, USC on a different tier than all of these other programs. So it's a sad thing that happened, but we saw it with Jonathan Smith at Oregon State. It's a fascinating moment in time. And to the people of Oregon, you're welcome.
All right, so getting back to UW, the piece of good news in 247sports.com's transfer portal news today was that quarterback Dyson McCutcheon has withdrawn his notification
I'm
to
aware.
transfer.
It's good news is already, there's no singular, it can't be good new. If there was a way to make it singular.
He'll have 2 years of eligibility remaining after seeing limited action as a reserve. But really the important thing here is to highlight that, again, as we talked about, in the Kalen DeBoer emergency pod, just because a player submits a notification of transfer does not mean he transfers, actually. And this is, I don't know what about the idea of transfers just warps people's brains entirely. But the transfer portal is just a database, and you can put your name into it, but you can also take your name back out of it. And as we talked about under Kalen DeBoer, it did seem to be the Huskies' policy that if you submitted a notification of transfer, entered your name into there was no coming back. The door was closed behind you. But it was easy to say when the guys who were doing it were guys who were leaving because they weren't playing or because there was a disciplinary issue. It's very different when 17 players, by Jed Fish's count during his press conference, have submitted notifications of transfer, which absolutely they should do. There's no reason not to. It's like declaring for the NBA draft. Once you've have only 1 year of eligibility remaining, there's no downside to it. You should absolutely explore your options. And then if UW is still the best fit for you, awesome, come back. So let's list the players who have submitted notifications of transfer.
It still doesn't feel good. I don't.
But just like, we don't need to overact. They're not gone yet. There's a re-recruiting.
The Dyson McCutcheon news is definitely, there's like deep blue something here a little bit. It's like,
re-recruiting, Jed Fish said, is his most important task right now before he goes out and recruits other players.
That's
He's
what he
got
said.
to keep guys around, which is, we've talked about, is one of the most important things Kalen DeBoer did when he took
Dyson
the UW
McCutcheon
job.
is the one that we've got right now.
So all three quarterbacks, scholarship quarterbacks on the roster, Will Rogers, Austin Mack, and then incoming recruit William Haskell, Jeremy Bernard, tight end Trey Watson, who transferred here from Fresno State, has already committed to Texas A&M. And
That one feels a little different to me.
That's sort of different because I think the guys who transferred in, including obviously Will Rogers, like, you don't have the same ties to UW. They've maybe not even attended a class yet, depending on the timing of when they
He
did. So
specifically was a Kalen DeBoer player.
correct. He had committed to him from Fresno State. But also, the other thing is, if you were previously in the transfer portal, you know exactly what the options are out there and which other teams were interested in you before you committed to UW. So you have a pretty good idea of where you might want to go if it's not UW. On the offensive line, starting guard Nate Caleppo, starting center Parker Brailsford. Brailsford, I think, is a really crucial one to re-recruit.
Also from Arizona.
3 years of eligibility remaining. Linebacker Ethan Barr, another of the incoming transfers.
Vanderbilt linebacker, right?
Yeah. And then Jabbar Muhammad, Mish Powell, and Asa Turner.
When Jabbar Muhammad was like, his number one choice was Oregon, I didn't see that.
Asa Turner was at the Jed Fish press conference on Tuesday, so perhaps that's an encouraging sign that he'll be coming back.
You gotta stay, Asa. Come on.
So 7 Huskies, or no, yeah, a total of 7 Huskies, I believe, have declared for the NFL draft. New ones, Troy, since we last talked, Troy Fautanu, Dylan Johnson, Jalen McMillan, Rome Odunze, and Braylon Trice.
There weren't any surprises, though. Like,
McMillan was the one who we thought was maybe on the fence after his injury-plagued season, whether he might come back to have a better final season in college.
And he also declared pre-Kalen DeBoer. So that wasn't
Correct.
a Kalen DeBoer.
I don't think any of these were Kalen DeBoer decisions.
No.
Odunze was the only one who declared after DeBoer left, I believe. I might have the timing wrong on that, but like Dylan Johnson was another one where, it wasn't considered 100% certainty he would go, but like,
I didn't even know he had a year of eligibility left. I thought Dylan Johnson was gone already.
Right. We know the nature of the running back position and how short careers those players have in the NFL. Every running back should declare as soon as they can, and as soon as
when they're like 16 years old in their prime.
As soon as they have realistic NFL draft stock. So good for him. And that is one spot where it looks like the Huskies almost certainly will be adding a player from Arizona, as all indications are that Jonah Coleman, who submitted a notification of transfer after Jed Fish's departure, will follow him to UW.
Jonah Coleman's that's been announced that he's planning on coming to UW.
It's not been announced, but that's
the chatter.
It's been reported by people close to the program. 24/7 Sports has him a 100% crystal ball to UW. Presumably he had one of the do not contact that suggests you already have your next destination lined up.
Do not contact. I mean, Jonah Coleman last year, 6.8 yards per carry, 871 yards, and involved
3 years of eligibility left.
Oh yeah, this is, and I think the piece that he's also involved in the receiving game at 283 receiving yards. Like Jonah Coleman is good, all caps. Jonah Coleman is somebody who, when we talk about that 3-year turnaround that Jed Fish might have, him being here at the program is a huge part of it. In college, where running backs might matter,
I think they do.
Having nobody to block for him isn't great. But maybe that'll be a good conversation with Parker Brailsford as well, and knowing that there's going to be a running back there. I also think when we're having, are we going to talk about the other Arizona players?
I mean, I don't. There's rumblings that Noah Fafita and Tetairoa McMillan might stay. Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports reported that, but it was more of a might again. And Kevin Cummings was considered part of that, and we'll see where he ends up.
Having a player from Arizona as part of that offense commit to, I didn't know that Jonah Coleman, that there was that many rumblings about UW. So having him commit to UW is like, hey, the word was that Noah Fafita, Tetairoa McMillan were trying to keep this together. They didn't say where. They just said they were trying to keep this together. So losing your number one running back to a program is, I mean, I feel bad looking at Arizona's players and being like, sure, it'd be nice to have them, but it sure would be nice to have them.
I mean, whether us looking at them is not really going to affect their decisions. So we shall see. We shall see on all of that.
But you talk about these sliding doors moments that happen. And I think watching what really these two players in Arizona do, because there's going to be dominoes that fall because of them, is the difference between, is this going to be a 3-year rebuild in Seattle, or is UW going to be competing for the playoff next year? And so I think that's why it's kind of wild to just watch this decision that's happening. And I'm like, is there NIL money that can be found? Can I go buy a poster, a hoodie? I will do all of those things, whatever is necessary. But I think that there is a full court press happening behind the scenes right now with those players.
I hope there isn't, is they cannot be contacted at the moment until they.
Oh, they can't be contacted until they enter the portal.
Yes. It was very amusing. I was watching an ESPN broadcast and they mentioned that they of Tennessee and Florida men's basketball, and they were talking about Tennessee transfer Dalton Connect, who's now an NBA first round prospect after transferring from Northern Colorado. And they were like, well, we talked to Rick Barnes before the game and asked him when he thought Connect first thought about transfer. He was like, oh, not until after the season. I was like, well, maybe that's true, but also you better say that if you're Rick Barnes.
Yeah, Jonah Coleman can have a conversation with them.
He can, well, but only them apparently. Anyways, yes, it's going to be an important thing. One last point on Jed Fish. So John Wilder made the case that the buyout figures for Fish, which are
not even John Wilder,
so $10 million the first year, drops pretty quickly in subsequent years if he leaves. One interesting thing is because of the fact that his contract was signed so late, it is a little bit different because if you're leaving, like the timing of this is all very different from when the college football coaching carousel normally is, which is in like early December. So that may work to UW's benefit. But I think the big thing to take away here is that if Jed Fish is such a desirable coach that he's going to be hired by a school that is going to offer him more money than UW, he'll already have signed an extension at UW. He won't be on this contract anymore. So I would not spend 1 second worried about that buyout.
I think that is John Wilner positioning a narrative that he is incentivized to
I mean,
push.
it is certainly true that his buyout is lower even than Kalen DeBoer's was relatively, in terms of the same number of years.
Lower than the first contract that Kalen DeBoer signed?
Yes. So that's interesting. And I do think that Jed Fish's agent negotiated, which I think is also Jimmy Sexton.
It's Jimmy Sexton. But he signed this contract after this current carousel. This is kind of, it's the most impacted UW coaching carousel that's ever happened.
It's only going to continue.
This is so far, I think, the wildest coaching carousel we've ever seen. I mean, it's very rare that the number one job opens up. I mean, it hasn't happened for 15 years.
Correct, but also 2 years ago, LSU, USC both opened up, and therefore Notre Dame and Oklahoma both opened up. So I think this is kind of the new normal in college football. But again, if Jed Fish has 2 good seasons at UW, guess what? He's going to get a new and even longer and even more lucrative contract because the money. What is your line? The money is endless.
Oh, the money is endless. That not at Arizona apparently.
Well, they need some of that money to retain their men's basketball coach. That's what
I
they really care
wouldn't
about
mind
in
him
Arizona.
either.
Tommy, I don't think Tommy
Unfortunately,
Lloyd's coming.
the Big 12 is a pretty legit basketball
Yeah, it
conference.
is a very legit basketball conference.
Uh,
Anything else on UW football?
I'm very fascinated to see where this ends up going. I'm excited to hearing about Jonah Coleman right here. I'm excited about that. I thought it was also interesting that so far, I think there was word that Parker Brailsford had interest from Alabama. We haven't seen a ton of players look to Alabama so far who entered the
I
portal.
mean, I don't know. Maybe I overestimate the difference between Alabama and UW. I do feel about Alabama. We've talked about this before on the pod. The famous quote about Julian Green
Uh-huh.
and Germany being like, "We have an entire pond of Julian Greens" or whatever the line was.
I I'm not sure. I mean, look, Alabama has talent on their roster, and I think the players who would have gone to Alabama are going to the NFL. But it is a little interesting. Like Jabbar Muhammad could play at Alabama. That isn't something that they immediately turned around and did, and that to me makes me maybe a little bit more nervous about looking at Arizona players because I do think that there's a little bit of an effect of like, damn, our coach just left us. Not like let's all go. There's an effect of damn, our coach just up and left us where we were.
That's probably fair. All right, let's talk about the Seahawks. And let's start with the return of a listener email.
Oh, hello.
I don't think I even told you about this, that this was a thing. From third Pelton brother, Zach Jabal, on Pete Carroll and Bill Belichick, which I need to scroll in because his font was extremely tiny here. I feel like the
That's
birth
how
of
you
the,
know it's a good email.
I feel like the birth of the Peltoncast Discord has kind of put on a damper on emails from the listener. And while in general that's a fine trade-off, I won't be ignored quite that easily. Would be ignored. It's hard for me not to think about Bill Belichick when I think about Pete Carroll. Obviously, their careers have had several noteworthy points of intersection, from Belichick replacing Carroll as head coach in New England to the curious circumstances surrounding the final minute of Super Bowl 49. I'm sure that each has a certain level of respect for one another, but it's the contrast between the two that is most noteworthy to me. In the history books, Belichick will be seen rightly as the most successful head coach in NFL history. He has the rings, and we've all counted them. Carroll's legacy will be largely positive, too. Obviously, no one can compare with Belichick in a pure numerical accounting, but between the dominance of the early 2010 Seahawks, the historic nature of their Super Bowl victory, and his long tenure in Seattle, I have no doubt that Carroll will be regarded as one of the great coaches in NFL history as well. Yet Belichick embodies everything I hate about football.
Wow.
The grim, joyless way he approached everything about football was directly at odds with Pete's obvious delight in what he did. Belichick's legacy is of an efficient dictator. He treated everyone from players to coaches to media members with a mix of scorn and cold calculation. His lasting contribution to the sport is in treating players like fungible assets, and his best as he could, ignoring their messy humanness in pursuit of yet another victory. For Belichick, winning seemed to prompt no delight, no celebration, but at best a very momentary respite before returning to his endless toil. His tenure has brought forth championships, yes, but also scandals, countless rifts with team legends, and a long-standing war with the media that covered the team. Carroll wasn't perfect, and I'm sure he had times where he mistreated people, but his warmth, his decency, and the way he cared about the people who made up the Seahawks over the whole of his time there was right out in the open. Sometimes that probably made the on the field product worse. He was nothing if not moved by his emotions. Insert parenthetical where you talk about Pete Carroll's emotional challenges. He grinned and strutted on the sidelines when things went well. He stared incredulously when they didn't. He reminded us when you could win the game, and he coached like a reasonably gregarious and well meaning human would. You could sum up the difference thusly. Pete was intrigued by the notion of scoregami and delighted in the fact that the Seahawks had won many such games, while Belichick's platonic ideal was unquestionably winning every game 2-0. History will sort the two men into different tiers about among Hall of Fame coaches, but I have no doubts about which one I'm glad was a Seahawk. He made it of one forever, but god damn it, Pete Carroll gave us one hell of a ride.
Damn, let's freaking go.
You want to retire Pete Carroll now, don't you?
No, that's what I'm saying. Literally every time that even I was talking about Pete Carroll and asking him to retire, it was always with the caveat of Pete Carroll seems like a really good guy. There was never a moment like that's not a thing you would say about Bill Belichick or almost any other coach, right? It's not a
I
thing you would
mean,
say about Jim Harbaugh. It's just you really, really, really like Pete Carroll on a personal level, and he wasn't the right football coach. That's it. Those two things can be true at the same time. So I I agree with all of that. It was so much fun watching Pete Carroll play or coach football. And it was fun being a fan of the Seahawks during that era. And then we got to experience that with Pete Carroll. And I don't think it's the best era of football that we'll have ever seen. You know, it'll be the most fun era of football. It became the time when the Seahawks, for me, maybe were the number one team, but they were perfectly there right after the Sonics left. They were there to fill in that hole, and they became the number one sports team in Seattle for me, and the number one sports team overall. So, and it's a huge part because of Pete Carroll.
I hate to defend Bill Belichick. I will give him a little credit. I do think there was a certain joy that Bill Belichick took in like the nerdy aspects of football that Zach is underselling. Like when people asked him special teams questions and he would like give like a 3 paragraph long answer in his weekly press conference. Like that was kind of fun in a certain way and probably was more evident to like Patriots fans than it was those of us on the outside. But I mean I do ultimately agree like to me, the most important thing about Pete Carroll is the way that even though he obviously was a hugely important figure on the Seahawks and a character in his own right, he also, like Bill Belichick, it seemed like wanted to squash all the Patriots into just
Yep.
do your job. And Pete Carroll was willing to let Seahawks players be big personalities and be themselves. And the way that that got the most out of, people like Marshawn Lynch and Richard Sherman and Doug Baldwin Jr. and like people were like very different personalities, but all part of the Pete Carroll tree. And that's why one of the coolest things that happened in the last week was obviously like Russell Wilson coming back and being part of that Pete Carroll celebration night. And Pete talked about it on Seattle Sports in his kind of farewell interview. The Russell Wilson and Richard Sherman telling him that like, look what had to happen for the two of us to have a friendly conversation again. You had to be fired, basically.
That's really funny.
I mean, I look, if Pete Carroll wants to coach again, that's awesome for him. I do kind of hope he doesn't because it does probably make it faster that we can get to the period where Pete Carroll is just like Seahawks legend Pete Carroll
Totally agree.
and
And,
Huskies legend Pete Carroll.
and I think that's the thing about Bill Belichick is like the Bill Belichick kind of is going out with a whimper right now in a way that Pete Carroll didn't.
Yep.
Right? Some of these seasons that the Patriots have had are significantly worse than any season Pete Carroll ever had, almost anywhere, as a Seahawks coach and at almost any stop. These seasons that Belichick has had, like Belichick doesn't look great right now, and Pete Carroll freaking won with Geno Smith. You know,
Yeah.
Pete Carroll won a playoff game with Matt Hasselbeck with Charlie Whitehurst, and Pete Carroll won with Geno Smith. Pete Carroll won no matter who was playing for him. He was best with Russell Wilson, but what he did in these 2 seasons with Geno Smith was in some ways the most impressive thing that Pete Carroll did in winning all these games. It wasn't right long term, and his scheme wasn't set up to make sense for this team long term, and the way that they invested draft picks and the way that they traded draft picks. But like Pete Carroll did a more impressive thing after his, I want to say Hall of Fame quarterback, maybe after his long-term superstar quarterback. Tom Brady didn't. And Tom Brady's now seeking that next job right away. Like Bill Belichick is seeking that next job right away. He's asking for the pain. He's asking to go out there and continue coaching and maybe lose more. Right now, Pete Carroll's just at the Husky offices chilling, having a good time, and his kid's there, and he seems very happy. So I think Pete Carroll is winning forever right now, and I don't think Bill Belichick is.
That's true.
I feel like Saban is actually kind of the middle ground. It's funny that those three coaches, the pillars, right? If Pete Carroll's on one end, Bill Belichick is on the other end. Saban is kind of right in the middle. Seems like there's a little bit of joy, has a little bit of fun, a little like wry, but also would talk about how winning the national championship means you couldn't recruit for that time period.
An amazing quote still.
So
Do we want to do the part now where we were talking about how Pete Carroll reinforced why it might not be such a good thing for him to be the head coach of the Seahawks?
you know, it was a nice thing for Pete to have done for us. in some of his exit quotes.
So again, in that Seattle sports interview that aired Friday was recorded Thursday on differences of opinion in postseason conversations with Seahawks management. The difficult part is, if you guys could know, it's really hard because they're not football people. They're not coaches. And so to get to the real details of it is really difficult for other people. And then he was asked whether he expected that. And he said, every year it feels like that you're going to be challenged by opinions that are kind of media opinions, because what else do people have when you're outside the game? How could you know other than what you guys talk about on the radios and what the articles say and what the pundits are drawing conclusions on? That's why you have to go on realizing that what you're dealing with and then try to talk through to get to the essence of this stuff. That's always going to be a challenge, because when you don't have legitimate dyed-in-the-wool football people calling the shots, then you have to try to make sense of it, just like we did try to make sense of it for your audience. It's no different.
I'm not even super sure I understand what that means ultimately.
I think it means that the media convinced Jody Allen and Burt Cole that the Seahawks had a bad defense.
Yeah.
Just the all-encompassing power of the media.
If they were football people, they would have loved some of those punts.
I mean, the thing I don't like about this in particular, and I don't think Pete Carroll intended it, is it plays into the stereotype of Jody Allen.
Oh, the sexism is definitely there.
But I think it's actually much more about Burt Cold, who has always been kind of the nebulous figure behind the scenes, more on the Blazers side than the Seahawks side historically, just because the Seahawks have had such stability in the Pete Carroll, John Schneider era. But Burt Cold is definitely doing a lot of things in Portland, by all accounts, behind the scenes. The Vulcans, as they were derisively referred to back in the day. You don't hear that phrase thrown around as much anymore. He was undoubtedly a big part of this. We've had it confirmed that he was part of these meetings. But also, like, this is one of the things we often talk about from my experience in pro sports. Like, being on the inside, do you have a lot more clarity about things? Yes. But what you trade off for that is that you don't have perspective, that you don't have objectivity. And I don't think Pete Carroll was objectively accurate about how good his football team is. And it concerns me a little bit that John Schneider also said today that he thought that they were pretty close to Super Bowl contention. Like, I would like someone with the Seahawks to step forward and say, hey, actually, no, we got outscored this season. We were a pretty mediocre fucking team, and we have a lot that we need to change.
I'm not
to
sure.
fix that.
I will say John Schneider's trying to hire a head coach.
Fair, yes. He is making that case. I don't think he's going to change his tune necessarily after they hire a head coach. That's one where you wonder if the Seahawks would have been better off just making a change at both GM and head coach at the same time.
We'll see. Obviously, I mean, I think this is an important hire. This is an important hire for John Schneider, and this is sort of his moment, his like Bill Belichick post Tom Brady moment, which is, what is John Schneider going to do when he's on his own? Because he has forever been linked to Pete Carroll as long as he's been the executive. It's 100%. John Schneider got the success with Pete Carroll. He got the blame with Pete Carroll. This is John Schneider on his own now. And we get to understand. I don't think we knew what John Schneider's perspective was, because it was so much about Pete Carroll and the on the field play and the personality of Pete Carroll. We're finally going to get a sense of, what does John Schneider want from this organization? And we see all these interviews, but like, whomever he chooses for this job will give us a big amount of perspective of what John Schneider sees as winning football.
I thought it was an interesting. So he was asked about the background and, kind of gave an open-ended answer. But one of the things he did point out is the difficulty of, if you have a defensive coach and you lose your offensive coordinator, and having a lack of continuity at that position for your quarterback and for your offense in general, which I think is one of the reasons that we would point to favor hiring an offensive coach rather than a defensive coach. He also made the case for special teams coaches based on John Harbaugh's success and the kind of holistic nature of their position. They have not yet requested to interview any special teams coaches.
John Harbaugh's success is really doing a lot for special teams coaches out there.
I mean, I actually do think it makes sense, because special teams coaches are the only ones that deal with potentially everyone on the roster in a unique way. Maybe. And they have to like think more strategically in some ways than coordinators don't have to think about
I'm not
game
sure
management to the same degree.
Coaches who are like came up as special teams coaches though.
There's
It's just
there's not.
it's a place you find yourself. If John Harbaugh wasn't hired as the head coach of the Ravens, he would have eventually been an offensive coordinator. Like,
I don't know what his background was. He would have been a defensive coordinator, right? Was he a defensive player?
was he a
really-
quarterback?
Was he? I don't really remember. It's also fascinating. Coaches that change sides of the ball is a fascinating thing to me. I think Raheem
He
Morris
really was a special teams coordinator just for a long time. He was a defensive back at Miami of Ohio.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, running backs coach and outside linebackers at Western Michigan. I love that. Just doing it all.
I believe Raheem Morris coached a year of offense before he went back to defense, if I recall this correctly. Yeah, he was the wide receivers coach for the Falcons from 2016 through 19.
But here's to my point. He was the defensive backs coach before the year before he was the head coach of the Ravens. So he was on the trajectory to become defensive coordinator.
I agree with that.
It was a long time as special teams coordinator at the Eagles and then defensive backs coach, but he wasn't like, it's honestly strange that a defensive backs coach was promoted to head coach. And I think his pedigree was a huge part of that. Like if he wasn't, that's the piece that I was talking about head coach in the NFL. You need a thing. You either have to have a really good offense, be attached to somebody like that, been a head coach before or something, have the name or whatever. But to be a head coach in the NFL and be successful, a lot of times you just need a thing. And being John Harbaugh was his thing.
All right. Well, let's talk about the 8 reported interview requests for the Seahawks so far, evenly split thus far between defensive and offensive coordinators. Ajiro Evero, the Panthers defensive coordinator, Patrick Graham, the Raiders defensive coordinator, Ben Johnson, the Lions offensive coordinator, who was Ben Baldwin's pick. Maybe some Ben nomenclature bias there. Mike Kafka, the Giants offensive coordinator. The
most
aforementioned
Kafka-esque of the coaches that they have interviewed.
indisputably Raheem Morris, the Rams defensive coordinator. Dan Quinn, coming off of that Cowboys loss, their defensive coordinator. Bobby Slowick, don't call him Slovic, the Texans offensive coordinator, coming off the master class that the Texans offense put up against the Cleveland Browns on Saturday in their playoff win. And then Dolphins offensive coordinator Frank Smith.
I think the question you have to ask is, can Mike Kafka make that kind of metamorphosis into head coach?
Oh, this is
No,
how
it
we're
is
doing it.
like seeing these interviews. Literally, there is nothing that can be gleaned from them.
They are interviewing everyone, and John Schneider said there are more to come, that they haven't really yet considered college coaches. We'll see, how Jim Harbaugh factors into their search. If they're looking for the most John Harbaugh-esque candidate, I gotta say, Jim Harbaugh is undoubtedly
Inspired by John Harbaugh.
the most Harbaugh candidate.
I don't think Jack is going to be looking for a job. So,
He's a little older than Pete Carroll.
wow, how much older do you think Jack Harbaugh?
Oh, he's got to be at least 85. Come on.
84.
There you go. Okay.
He's not. How old do we determine Pete Carroll is? 72.
He's 72.
Okay. We determine. We triangulate.
we counted the rings.
But
What about Tom Crean? Is Tom Crean interested in coaching the Seahawks?
They really have cast a very wide net. There was a news story going around, literally front page of ESPN. It's like there's one thing that John Schneider's been tasked with in a head coach. And I'm like, well, this should be good. And it's like, maintain the culture. And I'm like, great. Literally, there's nothing so far that can really be learned about what John Schneider is going to do with this position. Offense, defense, perspective, young, old. It's kind of just a bunch of dudes right now. So, which is good at the same time, because after he ends up making this decision, I think we're going to have a very good sense of, okay, John Schneider's heard all these perspectives. This is the one that he thinks is most aligned with winning football games. So,
I still don't know if we'll have a good perspective, because it's the same thing I said about coaching hires and firings at the athletic department, director level. And it's actually exponentially more choices you get to make, because there's, 19 programs or whatever it is at UW. Like
some of them can't even make the rundown.
Many of them, sadly. But if he
Those
picks
boys
Dan
are on the
Quinn,
boat, but they ain't on the rundown.
they get a toast when there are crew titles. I don't know that we're gonna have like weekly updates on UW crew. But if he hires Dan Quinn because he thought that Dan Quinn was like a really good dude when he was the Seahawks defensive coordinator, I don't know that necessarily we could draw that much from that even. But yes, from this list, we cannot draw anything. And look, again, they should be trying to interview as many people as they can so that they're exposed to people because some of these coaches might not necessarily make sense as head coach of the Seahawks, but they might make sense as if it's Ajiro Avero becoming defensive coordinator, if you hire a first time head coach who's an offensive coordinator. Like that's the kind of scenario that I think makes a lot of sense. And guess what makes that easier? If you've just interviewed them to be your head coach.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think they're definitely going about this process seemingly the right way. And I'm fascinated to see what they say. I mean, I do think we'll get a sense of what John Schneider is looking for, but also their individual personalities as well. So, but I think he's interviewing enough people on both sides of the ball and both perspectives that I think we'll get a sense of what that looks like. I mean, obviously, I think all of the names that we look at and the ones that we're excited about are coming from the offensive side of the ball. And all of them, for the most part, you look at, they haven't even submitted an interview for Dave Canales yet, right?
They have not requested, yes.
But you do kind of look at the coordinators who are left around the league, and a lot of them are looking pretty good right now. And I think you have to specifically look off coaching carousel batch for this season. And all of a sudden, after seeing these names, I'm like, I actually think there are some very strong ones out there.
Yeah. I mean, I said it about Bobby Slowick. Like, I don't think I would even go to the interview. I'd just be like, submit a YouTube link to the game on Saturday and be like, enjoy this, motherfuckers. That would be my interview. So we'll see. Obviously, the Seahawks actually can't, all these interviews at this point are virtual. They can't interview coaches in person until January 22nd. And that's
What is the logic for that?
that they don't want to disadvantage coaches who go further in the playoffs because it's harder to interview them while they're preparing for games. And so the in-person interviews can start January 22nd, but that's only with eliminated coaches or those who are not currently
new?
under contract. That is, I believe, new. Is it last year?
Okay.
So,
I mean, some of the coaches who, both the offensive coordinator and the defensive coordinator of the Super Bowl losing team ended up with jobs. Of course, the offensive coordinator of the Super Bowl winning team didn't get a job.
And is not on the Seahawks list of reported interviews, that being Eric Bieniemy. So, yeah, we'll see. Has he been reported as interviewing for any jobs?
I haven't seen his name at all.
Yeah. That's about par for the course.
I mean, yes, that is par for the course, where opportunities would have popped up. So you go back to, this is why Kalen DeBoer had to take that Alabama job this year, though, because opportunities, Eric Bieniemy was passed over probably for other reasons, but opportunities don't necessarily pop up a year later. I mean, I asked you this earlier about Lincoln Riley, why he wasn't a name around Alabama. And it's like, a couple years ago, Lincoln Riley was the number one coach around the country.
Because I was looking at my calendar. I don't know where I put it on the calendar, but I guess it was after the Super Bowl, maybe. Did Ken Dorsey get a head coach interview? I have not yet seen.
Who argued for this?
You did.
I said he was going to?
Yeah, after he got fired by the Bills.
After the
you
fire.
were like, he's going to get interviewed for a head coaching job despite being fired as an offensive coordinator. Even though Ken Dorsey did nothing wrong, he has not yet been interviewed.
And wait, who's their new coordinator?
Joe Brady.
Yeah, I haven't seen him be mentioned either.
No. We'll see if they keep winning, though. All right, well, we will see what more news we have on the Seahawks coaching search this time next week, or perhaps at some point if we have an emergency pod. Look, we're well practiced at those.
We love doing them.
That siren has been getting a real workout, siren emoji. If you've listened to all of the emergency pods, my friend texted me. He asked me when he was getting his socks, a la the Little Woody's Burger month for having listened
for
to
listening to every
emergency
emergency pod.
Just Ross Seiler for that one.
Oh my god.
We'll have to get those in the mail.
It's also just a great reference. There's a Talking Taco Time shirt if you want one. If you don't have a Talking Taco Time shirt already, and you could prove somehow that you listen, and you could just tell us.
Yeah, I think we'll believe it.
Well, yeah, we'll trust that you listen to all emergency pods.
I mean, look, you've obviously listened to the end of this podcast because you're hearing.
Yeah, if you made it here, just let me know.
On that note,
Send me a private DM on Discord with your address, and I will mail you. I don't know what sizes we have left. Size small.
you're not a lot of. We have any size you want as long as it's small.
There might be a medium or two, but
I think so. On that note,
thanks for listening.
thanks.
Talking Taco Time shirt. I mean, I just like to get them out of my basement. All right. I feel like we have to do the we've done so many hats. Did I argue against a beanie last time?
We'll talk about it later, but yes.
Oh, I was so stupid for arguing that.
I agree.
I think beanie's the way to go, actually, now that I think about it.
Yeah.
For the next one. It's just because I'm cold right now. I feel like we do the merch of the spring and I'm like, I'll never be cold again.